Welcome to Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and me, Jim Cunningham.
Mr. Jim Cunningham, it is a delight, can I say that, to see you.
I'm not sure I buy that, but I'm thrilled that you would even hint that that's true. I always enjoy these podcasts. And seeing you, Mr. Gaspard, how are you?
I'm good. You know, we used to see each other in person more often than we do now. That's
Exactly.
just the way things have shaken out. Maybe we will again in the future, but it is a delight when the little thing pops up on the screen that says, Jim Cunningham has joined your meeting. So welcome to season 5, episode 8. Today we're going to listen to chapter 8. We're also going to re-listen to a little something that our past guest Michael Close talked about when he talked about coaching magicians on how to do a good job on Penn and Teller Fool Us, about how you need to adapt your act for television, which I think means a lot. Magicians out there now doing virtual shows, and about the tricks that camera angles help you with and the ones that don't. But before I dive deep into that, I'm glad that listeners were as delighted with Sarah Ballantyne as we were.
Who couldn't be? She's terrific.
Yes, great response on that. Like I said, if you saw the link last time for Troopers and didn't click on it this time. And I'm going to throw it in there again. What the heck? I'm going to put her documentary in there again because it is just such a love letter to actors of a certain age and what they've gone through to get to where they are, including her father, Carl Ballantyne, who is a slight presence in the documentary because he just didn't think he was worthy of it, but every time he shows up, he is delightfully Carl Ballantyne-esque. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about our chat with Michael Close. Last time I recommended, if you don't already, listen to Conversations with Close. It's a great podcast from Canada, in which he just sits and chats for about an hour with magicians who are generally longtime friends of his. So you get some really, really friendly conversations and some in-depth knowledge about how people got to where they are. Like Michael Close, we get to talk to a lot of magicians. In his case, he's right there on Fool Us. We're fascinated by that process. We've loved hearing about it from other magicians, from their point of view. So when we got the chance, we wanted to find out what that process looked like from the other side.
When you work with an act, Joe Blow has been chosen to come on Penn and Teller because of something he has sent in. You look at it. Do you coach this person up? Do you look at their method and say, nah, they're going to absolutely tumble to that method. But if you did this, this, and this, you'll get the same effect, and they may not get that. Is there that kind of a process going on?
Oh, absolutely. We used to joke that in the earlier seasons of the show, it should really be called Mike and Johnny Fool Penn and Teller. Because, it's my job and I want it to look absolutely great for several reasons. I want people to have a happy experience being on the show. Number two, I want to make it as difficult as possible for the people who like to go through frame by frame, try to figure out how this stuff works. I don't want to make their job easy. So I'm going to use every bit of deviousness that I have in my old body to try to work things out so they're really seamless. And yes, there is an enormous amount of coaching. I mean, I was just talking with a fella, and this leads into the magic on TV thing. I wish I knew as much about magic on TV not as I know now, back when I was doing videos for L&L, because there's so many mistakes I made. The problem with doing a magic video, if you're not somebody who does magic on TV, is you're used to performing for real people. And the thing is that the human eye is so much more sensitive to being able to focus in on things than a camera is. So consequently, if you want the audience to know the name of a card, what I would normally do as a close-up performer is I'd just move it from side to side so everybody at the table could see what it is. But if you make that gesture on TV, it's just a blur for the cameras. So, it's these small points, stopping and making sure that the camera can focus in on what's going to happen that are important. The other thing that happens on TV for close-up guys is there is no misdirection. Misdirection absolutely is gone when you do magic on TV. By that, I mean, if I'm working in a restaurant and I'm standing, which is one of the reasons I always stood when I perform, and I've got people seated at a table, then if I'm talking to somebody to my right and I suddenly turn my head to the left and I call one of the spectators by name, then everybody's eyes are going to hit my eyes and then hit his eyes. And when that happens, I have a shadow zone where I could do something, get a break or palm a card or whatever it is. But that gives me a shadow zone to work in because of the way people's eyes work. It does not happen on television. Once you draw the rectangle around the action, every bit of information in the frame is of equal importance. And so there's some things you simply can't misdirect against. And sometimes this requires a lot of ingenuity. One of the acts, his trick required a move that you actually cannot get away with on television. You can do it easily live, but it just flashes like crazy. And I figured out a way to do it on television. And he ended up fooling Penn and Teller with it. And one of the great things for me was as I was listening to them talk when they went back to their chairs, one of the first thing Teller said was, well, he couldn't be doing, and it was the name of the move that the guy actually did. And they just didn't see it. They just didn't see it.
So the shadow zone, I've never heard of that before. I don't know, you as a occasional performing magician,
Yeah.
the idea of there being a shadow zone, have you dealt with that?
Well, I am not. I know just enough to do what I need to do.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, there's a moment where if you can get in Doc Eason, when we talked to Doc, talked about that. Well, what kind of car do you drive? Just get him to look at you for a second. That's the shadow zone. Now you can do whatever surreptitious move you need to do while they're not looking at your hands, or they're not burning you.
Right.
And so that's my understanding of the shadow zone for what it's worth.
And it just doesn't exist on TV. You don't.
You can't because the camera doesn't do what our eyes do, which is and Eugene Berger always used to say the human eye is like the eye of the snake. It's drawn to movement. So in a camera shot, you can't misdirect somebody to get them to not look at your hands. The camera's looking at your hands.
Yeah.
And you can't misdirect the camera to like you can with a human. And so the shadow zone maybe doesn't exist on TV, but how cool that Michael Close figured out a way for this guy to do something that then fooled Penn and Teller and fooled them with the move that I just think that's great. It's just phenomenally fun for me that he is that involved and that helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, that idea that early on the show was called Johnny and Mike Fool Penn and Teller. And, the focus, as a lot of magicians have told us since then, is less on fooling them and more on what Mike Close is trying to do, which is to just let's make magic and magicians look good. And there is no show that does that better.
No. And as I've said repeatedly on this podcast, I think the Magic Fraternity owes a huge debt to Penn and Teller for revitalizing magic, for making magic an art form again that people are excited about, that people want to go see, that people are seeking out. And I think that has a lot to do with not just Penn and Teller, although I would give them the lion's share of the credit, but the other America's Got Talent and those other shows that are showcasing magicians in a way that makes people go, well, that's amazing. I'd like to see more of that. And that is a good thing for all of us. Those of us who like magic, those of us who occasionally do magic, and then the professional magician. It's all great. It's all great.
Yeah, it is. We bouncing back to when we opened the show, we were talking about Sarah Ballantyne and people's reaction to it. We'd love getting emails from you listeners. A couple guests this season actually started just as emails and turned into guest slots. They didn't ask to be on, they were just commenting on the show. And so anytime you want to drop us a note and let us know what you think, by all means do that. You can just go to EliMarksMysteries.com. And, or if I think of it, I'll put an email thing in the show notes and just drop us a note because we've gotten a couple of great ones recently. And Jim, I forwarded one on to you that came in.
Yeah, and I love it. I love hearing from folks and their thoughts on stuff. And this particular email that you forwarded to me, I thought was terrific. And he mentioned Eugene Berger, the line that he said. You guys are kind of all around this, but here's the quote that I remember from Eugene, and because my particular stage style or presence depends on being glib and humorous. I don't think he said this to me specifically, although he did. It was a general kind of term, and this guy who sent us the email reminded me of it. This quote from Eugene: "Magic is being ruined by an undisciplined use of comedy."
Mm-hmm.
Undisciplined use of comedy.
Yeah.
And Eugene would talk about that, there is a time for jokes, and certainly humor can be a great source of misdirection,
Mhm.
but the undisciplined use of comedy was ruining magic. Now, I would say magic, as we've just talked about, is in the midst of a resurgence, and maybe that's not as true as it was. And if it isn't, it may be because Eugene said that as magic's mystic guru. But yeah, I mean, so I was tickled to get that email because it reminded me of that concept and idea. And it's really great, I think, when somebody takes the time to respond to us.
Yeah. It's nice to know that we're not talking into the void or just.
I'm happy to talk into the void, but once in a while, when the void talks back, it's fun.
It is fun. And I believe he called out Chris Hendricks, Lucy Darlin, having touched on that when she was on the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you go back to listen to Derek Hughes and Nick DeFont, they definitely talked about the necessity to pull comedy out in order to make things stronger. It's a really good point. And I love that people are emailing us and talking about that. And speaking of
I
things
agree.
I'd love, it's my turn.
You start.
I love that. We often recommend TV shows, and I feel bad about recommending something that might not be available to everybody, but if you just make a note of it, they tend to turn up all over the place. The show that I want to talk about stars an actor named Hugh Dennis, who we first met on a comedy panel show that is no longer running in Britain called Mock the Week, in which 6 different comics and a host would just riff on the news. And it had a permanent host, Dara O'Brien, and it had one permanent panel member, and that was Hugh Dennis. But then he's also an actor, and he turns up beautifully in Fleabag season 1. He's the guy who turns you down for a loan and then comes back at the end of the season and says, "Let's try that again." And talks to her about getting a loan. And he has a series which has been running for many, many, many years called Outnumbered. And it's about a middle-class couple. He's a teacher. She does other part-time things, and they have 3 kids, a young boy, a young girl, and then a teenage boy. And over the course of all the seasons, you see the kids grow up. It reminded me of, Jim, something you said when your 3rd child was born, and you said we're no longer playing, what was it, man-on-man, we're playing a zone defense.
Yeah.
Or zone defense. I'm not a sports person. I don't know which way it goes. Anyway, it's called Outnumbered, and it is just about the life of this couple and dealing with these kids.
Oh, hi, how was your game? Ask him!
The referee didn't show. They asked if a parent would volunteer. I stepped up to the plate, and, well, the match wasn't without its controversial moments. And to cut a long story short...
He sent me off!
Yes, I did. That's right.
He sent off his own son!
Well, I couldn't show him any favouritism. That would have weakened my authority.
Oh, Pete.
I'm sorry, Sue. 3 times I warned him about diving. The 3rd time would have made even Ronaldo blush. You left me no wriggle room.
My mates all think you're an idiot.
Yes, I know that. They expressed that opinion quite forcibly. Mind you, they won't be doing that again in a hurry.
Why not? Because you sent them off too, all of them. You sent off the whole team.
You can't give in to mass dissent, Sue. That is the start of the slippery slope.
It's nothing to do with slippery slopes. You're in a bad mood since the moment you arrived, you stupid pillock. You're stupid. Stupid pillock brain.
You see, that is the kind of thing I had to put up with.
These kids are just amazing and funny, and reminds me again and again why I'm glad I don't have children. But might remind you how much you enjoyed that phase when they were growing up.
Well, we will give this a watch.
It's
There's
called Outnumbered.
Outnumbered.
Outnumbered,
And it's on Roku, did you say?
It's on Roku. Might be other
Got
places
that.
as well. And it is it's a delight. It's every episode just throws you right in the middle of something and then kind of pulls you out at the end.
Well, that's a great one, and we will check that out because there is the Venn diagram of shows that both Rachel and I might enjoy. Is a tricky thing to find, so that might be one that we will add to the mix.
Go for it.
And my I love that is a television show that I really enjoyed when it was on. In fact, I enjoyed it so much when it was on that I would either make a must-see experience and make sure I was there for it, or I would make sure I taped it when we were still doing that. So it's that long ago. But it stars Scott Bakula in the first experience I had with him in a show called Quantum Leap. And I
Yes.
hadn't thought of it in years. I hadn't thought of it in years. And I was watching something, and Scott Bakula, I think it was something about Star Trek, and Scott Bakula popped up because he was in a Star Trek series. And I thought, I wonder if Quantum Leap is available anywhere. And of course it is. You can watch it for free with commercials, or you can not have commercials, which is my preference, and pay a little bit to watch either by episode or by season on Prime. And so that's what I have done, and I am thoroughly enjoying my rewatching of Quantum Leap with Scott Bakula.
Theorizing that one could time travel within his own lifetime, Dr. Sam Beckett stepped into the Quantum Leap accelerator and vanished. He awoke to find himself trapped in the past, facing mirror images that were not his own, and driven by an unknown force to change history for the better. His only guide on this journey is Al, an observer from his own time, who appears in the form of a hologram that only Sam can see and hear. And so Dr. Beckett finds himself leaping from life to life, striving to put right what once went wrong, and hoping each time that his next leap will be the leap home.
He is jumping into these people's lives and trying to solve some problem that the timeline needs correcting. And I'm just loving it. And it's what I like about it is without commercials, they're about 40 minutes and you can blow through it and there's laughs and it's fun. And I just, it's just a great blast from the past for me to revisit Quantum Leap with Scott Bakula. I think you'll love it if you haven't seen it. It's worth starting with episode 1, season 1, so you get the sort of backstory and can understand who these people are and why this is happening. But it's really fun.
Let's say a little shout out for Dean Stockwell, who
Dean
plays
Stockwell.
plays, I believe it's Al,
Al.
the a kind of AI computer generated assistant, and also just a quick remembrance to Dennis Wolfberg, who plays Gushy or Gashi or some little weird. He's like a scientist on it. He was a stand-up comic, great stand-up comic. He had sort of these weird Marty Feldman eyes. He's name-checked in our episode with George Campbell, I believe, because George, I believe, lists the week that he spent at a comedy club, I think in Florida, and Dennis Wolfberg was the headliner as one of the best weeks of his life as a stand-up comic. Yes.
Oh.
Dennis died way, way, way too young, but was a very He was a unique talent and a very, very funny stand-up, and I highly recommend that show. In fact, back in my screenwriting days, my writing partner, Michael Levin, and I wrote a spec script, Never Went Anywhere, for Quantum Leap, in which Dr. Sam Beckett leaps into the body of a serial killer on death row who escapes.
Well, it's there's I don't want to give too much away, but in later seasons, he leaps into Lee Harvey Oswald.
Oh, wow.
And it's a really interesting episode because they give you a frame there of him having kind of multiple personalities, which I thought, oh, that's an interesting take on that whole thing.
Yeah, it's a great show.
Yeah.
A very nice. Good call on your part.
Thank
Good
you.
call. Good call. Okay, let's move on to where we're supposed to be. Last time we listened to chapter 7, in which they were talking about the stealing that had been done by Jake North. And Eli's kind of moving around this creepy house, and he finds Megan is sleeping, and he's just nervous about being in the house. And he goes to sleep, and that takes us right into chapter 8.
Chapter 8. The casual lunch Lawrence Baxter had offered the day before had me anticipating what breakfast might be like from the moment I woke up. I doubted the traditional English breakfast atrocity I had undergone at Faulty Towers would be duplicated in these more posh surroundings, and once again, Baxter and his staff did not disappoint. When we found our way to breakfast, Megan made a beeline for a cup of coffee, as she was still feeling the effects of her late-night girl chat session with Roxanne. Uncle Harry, Hector, and DeVries were all seated around the table, each working on breakfasts in various stages of completion. I was just pulling up a chair when Lawrence came in, dressed like the country gentleman he was, or at least had become, a newspaper folded neatly under his arm. "Ah, the dead awaken," he said, with great cheer when he saw me and Megan. He placed the newspaper at the head of the table and walked to the swinging door to the kitchen, opening it just enough to speak into it. "2 more for breakfast, Gwen," he said, and then turned back at the sound of other people entering the room, the Templetons and Angus Bishop, all looking to be in about the same shape as Megan. "Strike that. 5 more," Baxter said. "And more coffee, by the looks of it. Lots more coffee." For a moment, I tried to picture what it would take to fit a crowd of this size for breakfast in my small apartment, and realized I could easily accomplish it, as long as guests were willing to eat in shifts of 2 at a time. Baxter's table was set for 12, and even with 9 of us in the room, the space didn't feel the least bit cramped. "Gwen will be out in a moment to take your breakfast orders," Baxter said as he took his place at the head of the table. "As you can see," he continued, gesturing at the folks already eating the food in front of them, "cook can throw together just about anything your heart desires." He looked more closely at what Harry, DeVries, and Hector were eating. "Anything from steak and eggs to a traditional English breakfast, or I'll just say it's something Spanish involving eggs and cheese. Am I right, Hector?" Hector was in the middle of chewing, but he nodded enthusiastically. I glanced at Harry's steak and eggs, which would never have been allowed back home in Franny's kitchen, given his cholesterol levels, and then stole a peek at DeVries' traditional English breakfast. I was prepared for the worst, but unlike the freak show I'd been served earlier in the week, what I saw on his plate not only looked edible, but actually quite enticing. The eggs were poached perfectly, the bacon looked crunchy and inviting, the toast was browned impeccably, the tomatoes looked appealing, and even the dollop of baked beans didn't seem entirely out of place on the fine bone china plate. The contrast with my first encounter with the traditional English breakfast could not have been starker. The version Baxter was serving looked like it had been created for a high-end gourmet cooking show. The one I had been served earlier in the week was more suitable for a horror film. My decision made, I took a seat and poured myself some orange juice. Then, when the young maid, Gwendolyn, asked me what I would like for breakfast, I happily announced to one and all that I would like the traditional English breakfast, thank you very much. This was, as it turned out, a bigger deal to me than anyone else, and soon the conversation turned to that night's show at the Magic Circle. My understanding is we are safe to continue our week-long Magi Festival this evening, Baxter said as he buttered a piece of toast taken from an odd device on the table in front of him. It looked to be made of metal, and it secured each singular piece of bread in its own tiny toast corral. As he was the head of the club's board, I sensed this decision to resume the shows was actually his to make. But I guessed he wanted to give the impression he was just one of the guys, and no one seemed to want to contradict him on this, even though everyone knew he wasn't. Gwendolyn at the door to the kitchen scanned the room to see if anyone needed anything. Hector raised his coffee cup, and Gwendolyn returned and took it from him with a big smile, heading to the coffee urn on the sideboard to refill it. He watched her do it, and then glanced to me with a playful wink. Despite his advanced years, or perhaps because of them, his eye for the ladies, which was legendary within the group, had apparently not diminished. We essentially lost Saturday, Sunday, and Monday nights, Baxter continued. So, I think the simplest solution would be to move those missing acts to our remaining 4 evenings and simply shorten everyone's stage time. Does anyone have any objection to this idea? I do 3 tricks, and 3 tricks only in my show, Angus said as he reached out a stubby hand and nabbed one of Baxter's toast slices. The whole mess can either take 40 minutes or 20 minutes. In a pinch, I can do it in 10 minutes. But I once did stretch the whole thing out to 90. Pretty proud of that, so I have no problem cutting back my time. Although it sounded like an odd boast, it was actually not uncommon for comedy magicians to be able to expand or contract their acts at will, still doing all the same tricks, but simply adding more or less comedy and audience interaction. While I had some tried-and-true comic lines I could add to my act on the fly, I felt a little jealous about their ability to change the length of their shows on a whim. To make my standard show longer would require either adding a moderated Q&A segment or a handful of knock-knock jokes. The less the merrier as far as we're concerned, right, hon? Roy said, turning to Roxanne for confirmation. Cut us to 20, 10, whatever works for you. My husband is one of the few performers I know, Roxanne said to Megan, who actually prefers less time on stage. Always leave him wanting more, Roy said, smiling broadly. If he had his way, his act would consist of an introduction and a bow. One never wants to overstay one's welcome, Roy added, although encores are always appreciated. All I ask is that the complete act takes at least as much time as I took to put on my makeup and pour myself into my Spanx, Roxanne said with a laugh. In that case, we would probably need to add an intermission, Roy said, because your prep is taking longer and longer every year. If only other things got longer every year, she said in a loud stage whisper. After an awkward moment of silence, Roxanne and Roy burst out laughing. I really couldn't tell if this was a practiced routine, a new ad-lib, or simply a veiled argument taking the form of playful banter. While they all continued to discuss their willingness to shorten their shows, I noticed Megan was trying to get my eye. I gave her a quizzical look, and she glanced down at her hand, indicating one of her rings. She then pointedly looked at each of the older gentlemen at the table, her scrutiny falling on each of their hands. She then looked back to me for a silent explanation. Just as I had done when I first met Lawrence Baxter, she had recognized that the ring we always saw on Uncle Harry's finger was not nearly as unique as we had perhaps thought. Each of the magicians at the table sported the same ring. Upon hearing the name Jake North, I mouthed the words, "I'll explain later," to her and turned my attention back to the conversation. I'm sorry, I said. We need to sort out this business with Jake North, Baxter said. I can't say I want him on our stage if he's pilfering from other magicians. That sends a bad message, if you ask me. I'm just saying I think we should hear his side first, DeVries said quietly. It looked like Baxter was about to reply, but something caught his eye across the room. He got up quickly, carelessly tossing his perfectly folded napkin on the table. I turned to see where he was headed and was surprised to realize Miss Hess had entered soundlessly and was standing statue-like behind me. She and Baxter exchanged a few words so quietly that even at my close range, I couldn't discern a sound. They were breathing louder than they were talking. Seconds later, Baxter left the room. Miss Hess surveyed the group around the table for a moment and then followed him, leaving as noiselessly as she had entered. "You ought to put a bell on that one," Angus said, taking Baxter's sudden exit as an opportunity to snatch 2 more pieces of toast from his holder. "Ella me asusta," Hector said, shuddering visibly. While my Spanish failed me, his body language did a good job of translating. "As I was saying," DeVries said, "before we land on anything definitive, I would love the opportunity to talk to Jake North and see what he has to say for himself and his actions. It could have been a simple mistake." "A simple mistake," Angus said, just about to chomp into the toast and stopping in mid-bite. "Like what? He accidentally did Eli's routine like a monkey accidentally typing out Hamlet? Not bloody likely. Where I come from, you are innocent until proven guilty," DeVries said, pointedly turning his attention back to his breakfast. "Yeah? Where I come from, that sort of behavior will get you 20 stitches and a nice long stay in hospital," Angus replied, crunching his toast defiantly. "I'll talk to Jake and we'll sort it out. He may end up with only a couple of stitches," I joked quickly, hoping to diffuse the tension in the room if only a little. "One time in Vegas, a magician stole one of Roy's routines verbatim, word for frickin' word," Roxanne said, addressing Megan directly. "You know what Roy did? He got on a plane, flew to where the guy was working, knocked on his hotel room door, and Roy punched him square in the mouth, broke the jerk's nose, and took out 2 teeth. I also bruised a knuckle, which later got infected and still bothers me to this day," Roy added, flexing his right hand to demonstrate an unseen issue with flexibility. "But she leaves that part out because it tends to suck the wind out of the story." "Case in point," Roxanne agreed, jerking a thumb in Roy's direction. "You flew to where he was working?" Megan said, clearly not sure if they were putting her on or not. Roy shrugged. "I had frequent flyer miles that were about to expire. I figured we could take a trip to Hawaii, or I could settle a score and screw up my hand." "Ever the romantic," Roxanne said. "But the word got out. Don't get on Roy Templeton's bad side." "So did that stop the magician from stealing material?" Megan pressed. Roy shook his head. "Sadly, no. He never stole from me again," he said. "But that type never stops, really. They just change their methods. Of course, no one has ever been as blatant as Archie Banks when it came to out-and-out ripping people off. His rule of thumb," Harry said as he set his knife and fork down, "was if he could figure out how you did a trick, then it was fair game. Which is why I always told him all my secrets whenever I got the sense he was eyeing one of my bits." "That stopped him from stealing from you?" I asked. Harry shook his head as he dabbed his mouth with a napkin. "No, but it did act as a bit of a speed bump." The phrase produced a questioning grunt from Hector, who was also just about finished with his breakfast. "'Kay?" he asked. "He still stole from me. It only slowed him down," Harry explained. "I don't think anything could have stopped him." "Oh, yeah? I think the gas stove did a pretty neat job of it," Angus said with a grim chuckle. "Yes, well, there was that," Harry agreed. "Back to Jake North," DeVries said, clearly wanting to get the debut of his new illusion settled as quickly as possible. He looked at me directly. "How soon do you think you can talk to him?" I wasn't entirely certain, as I had no real idea how to get in touch with Jake. I had his email address, if he was still using that account, and somewhere I had his cell phone number, but I wasn't sure if it had made the migration from my old phone to my new one. To check, I pulled out the phone and opened the Contacts app. But before it had even launched, everyone at the table turned to the archway that separated the dining room from the massive front hallway. Lawrence Baxter was standing there, his hands fluttering at his side as if he had no idea what to do with them. He was as pale as he had been when Oscar's body had been discovered on stage at the Magic Circle, and it quickly became apparent why.
"The staff has informed me,"
he said, a slight hitch in his voice,
"and I have verified they are correct. Sadly, we have had a death in the house overnight."
Everyone looked around the table, quickly mentally sorting out who was there and, more importantly, who was missing. Baxter answered our question before anyone could raise it.
"Boris,"
he said.
"Boris is dead."
Okay, so Boris is dead. That is now
Boris
the
is
second
dead.
magician who's been murdered. For those of you just listening and not reading the book, Boris is spelled with a Y, Borys, because I ran into a waiter years and years ago who that was his name on his name tag, and I put it in my notes. I thought that's a cool spelling. of
You're like
Boris.
Dickens, just
Yeah.
collecting things that you
Collecting
can.
names, yes. So we've learned that Archie Banks stole from them years ago. Again, stealing is a theme that we will keep coming back to again and again in this book, because each book kind of has a theme to it, and that's the one on this one. So anyway, that's it for chapter 8. Next time, if there is a next time, no, there will be a next
What?
time. No, there will be a next time.
Right.
Next time, this will just make Jim break out in hives. Next time, episode 509, we're going to talk with a mathematician and magician, S. Brent Morris, who we call Brent. He's a really interesting gentleman. He was the first person to ever earn a PhD in card shuffling, and we are going to talk about
what?
Jim, relax. We're going to talk about math.
PhD in card shuffling.
Yes, he was the first one to do it. Others have done it since then. Yeah, it's about math. It's about shuffling and math
What?
and how math works in magic. So Jim is going to have to probably take a Valium before we start that episode, because I know math makes him anxious.
Yeah, I'm not. It's not my area.
No,
It was my understanding there would be no math on the
There-
pod.
there is a
I,
little bit.
Yeah, I am. Okay. All right.
So
All right.
That's what's happening. Next time, we're going to have Brent Morris talking about the mathematical science behind shuffling, and we'll also listen to Chapter 9 of the Linking Rings. Until then, keep in touch and stay safe.
Absolutely. And we're talking math in the next episode, so strap yourself in. We're about to make the jump to hyperspace.
Traveling through hyperspace ain't like dusting crops, boy. Without precise calculations, we'd fly right through a star or bounce too close to a supernova and then it end your trip real quick, wouldn't it?
What's that flashing?
We're losing a deflector shield.
Don't strap yourselves in. I'm gonna make a jump to light speed.
This has been Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and Jim Cunningham. Produced by Alberts Bridge Books at Grass Lake Studios. Find this podcast and all the books in the Eli Marks series at EliMarksMysteries.com. That's ELIMARKS Mysteries.com. And thanks for listening.